Hello. Could you tell a bit about yourself? That's really hard to do. Um, it's kind of a wide question, and there's too much to tell, really. So I have to let that slide. You'll have to explain to them about myself. How did you enter the video game industry? I was interested in video games, and I was in a band in the late 70s, and I wanted to be a really great musician like the Beatles. But it occurred to me that the Beatles were pioneers and they were blazing trails all the time, and that most of the trails have already been blazed in music. But at that time, video games were really new and weird. Parents didn't understand them. There weren't any ads for them, that's for sure. It was something you discovered at an arcade or at a grocery store, and it had a real mystique to it. It felt non-commercial, and it felt technological and attractive. You weren't being sold on it, so what you'd do is you'd tell your friends about it. And then the game designs were really elegant then. I decided that that was the rock and roll of the future, of what was the future. So I decided I wanted to get into that. A few years later, my brother's roommate from college was working for Intellivision. And I said, hey, can I work for you in some capacity? I'll empty trash cans for free, I don't care what. And he said, well, you're a musician, aren't you? We need some music. So he asked me to write music for Thin Ice for Intellivision. Let's see. Where did the persona of the fat man with his typical Texan apparel come from? Well, I got the name during a weak moment when I was being very Californian. And I was raving to my brother Dave. The other brother is Rick. I was raving to my brother about how I wanted to be a big show business tycoon and put my feet up on the desk and smoke a big cigar and tell people that they'll never work in this town again and other showbiz stuff like that. I said, I want to be the fat man of Austin. And so the next day my brother called me Fat Man. But since then it's been really a nice name, because people start out with a certain amount of curiosity about it, or maybe a little fear, and so the process of getting to know people is a process of letting the fear go away, and that's really nice. Oh, I thought you were going to be scary, I thought you were going to be mean. No. About your work, how was it to be an audio pioneer in the early 80s? Was your work more difficult to perform? Did you have more freedom than today? I definitely had more freedom. And that's really the key. And was it hard to perform? No, you're always working your hardest. People didn't expect as much, so it was very easy to exceed their expectations. And what didn't exist is all this kind of preconceived idea of what video games should sound like. So anything that I could do that was different and new was interesting to the game developers. And I was full of new stuff. And I still have been. I'm always full of stuff. And that isn't as welcome when the aesthetics of the day, now, are a little different. People kind of have an opinion of what they want stuff to sound like, and they have an opinion of what's good, and they're not necessarily always qualified to be artists. They might be advertisers or marketing people or investors, but they're not always doing something beautiful. Let's see. Seventh Guest was one of the very first games to use the CD-ROM format. Yes. How did you use the potential disc format? Why did you stick to the Midi format? Well, they only told me to do Midi. And then after I was pretty much done with everything, I said, hey, this new format that you're putting this out on, is it kind of like a CD? And Graham, one of the game designers, he said, yeah, sure, George, it kind of is. And I said, well, can you put CD music on it and like play that during the game? And he says, well, we could put music on it, I think. I don't know if we could play it on the game. And I said, well, if I gave you a bunch of music, if I made some extra music for the game, could you like put it on the CD so people could hear it? He said, sure, Fat Man, anything you want. So I made like 20 minutes of extra music to stick on the game, to just give as a bonus, which was nice because they gave me a little piece of the action. I got paid based on the sales of that game, which was one good deal I made. Although, well, there's more to tell on that. But Seventh Guest is out on iPhone now, so you can play your Seventh Guest on iPhone. Seventh Guest, it's on iPhone now. You can pay me for the song I just wrote, but you don't have to. Back
for more?
But that's not the song that's supposed to be in the beginning. That's supposed to be one of the CD songs. But that's supposed to be one of the digitally recorded songs. But maybe they didn't have enough room to put it on this thing. Anyway, I composed about 20 minutes worth of music to go in the game for free. And just for fun, I gave him like one or two songs that could go in the game. And a couple of them made it, and a couple of them didn't. But Skeletons in My Closet was supposed to play when you click on that character. Can't remember her name. And you're supposed to hear Team Fat singing the mysterious chant, Mister Farah Astaroth, at some point in there. Because I noticed the script called for a chant, so I figured I should be the one supplying it. And then also I did the digitally recorded intro music. That was fun. So why did I stick to the Midi format? Midi hadn't even been fully developed yet by the time, when that came out, let alone digital. I had to be the first to pioneer general Midi. So when that came out, when Seventh Guest came out, there weren't MIDI files that you could play on several different kinds of software. Because there wasn't a standard assignment of instruments to a given patch change number, which is general MIDI. So general MIDI just came out when I was working on the Seventh Guest. In fact, I called my friend Tom White at Roland, and I said, well, man, this is really a bummer. I have to write all these different versions of this music for all these different sound cards that exist. And he said, oh, well, why don't you just use general MIDI? I said, well, general MIDI, what's that? He said, just get a sound canvas and write for that. So I did. And then I wrote some sounds for the FM synthesizers that could emulate the general MIDI from the sound canvas, and those are still the ones that I wrote with my friend Kevin. Those tones are still in Windows somewhere. If you ever use FM from Windows, that's our tones. And I wrote a set of tones. We also wrote a set of tones for the MT32 and tricked it into emulating general MIDI. So, and then when the game came out, a bunch of phone calls came in for me. Oh, George, general MIDI's great. I want you to approve our general MIDI sound card. Well, there were, I want you to endorse it. Well, I thought, this is great. I'll have my picture on all these sound card boxes. And they'd send me these sound cards, and the sound cards would sound awful. And the reason was that even with the general MIDI specification, they hadn't specified like how fast an instrument should start and how loud it should be in relation to the others, so they still sounded awful. So we ended up starting a little company, never made any money off of it, Fat Labs. And the point of Fat Labs was to do testing for general MIDI sound cards to make sure that that their sound banks were within a given range and would sound okay. And I think we helped a lot. For a while you couldn't sell a sound card chip to a manufacturer in Taiwan if it didn't have the Fat seal of approval. I must have one around here somewhere. Well, here's a smallish one. Then what happened? What's the biggest challenge you encountered in your career as the Fat Man? Which game gave you the most issues? I'd say most of the really hilarious issues came from Cyberstrike. Cyberstrike 3? Cyberstrike 2? Cyberstrike 3. Just Cyberstrike, the only one I worked on. And the war stories are just too nasty. Hey, alarm, I gotta pick up my daughter from acting class. See ya.